Matt T will be sharing on God is everything or else he is nothing for 45 minutes, followed by a 15-minute Q&A. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you, Kira. My name is Matt. I'm a recovered alcoholic. I don't know how I'm supposed to say anything after an introduction like that. Wow. That was wow. Thank you. That was humbling in and of itself. Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah. Okay. Good. Because for whatever reason, my AirPods no longer like to connect to my laptop. So here we are. I'm coming to you live from Playa Hermosa, Costa Rica. And I like to usually start these things. I don't know what I'm going to talk about ever. I don't plan. I don't write. My girlfriend always thinks that I'm crazy for that. She's like, you don't prepare for these things. I was like, I know I'm going to talk about God. And so you don't really need to plan to talk about God. So I never plan, right? I say a prayer and it's always the same prayer. It's God, you're up. And so my pedigree is that my sobriety date is May 19, 2016. I have a sponsor. His name is Pat T. I have a home group. It is the BRONX Big Book Study. I sponsor a bunch of dudes. Some of those guys sponsor a bunch of dudes. We also host a Big Book workshop once a year where we take anywhere from 30 to 130 people through all 12 steps. And we'll be starting up the next one in January, which is very exciting. So God is everything or else he is nothing. Right? When I was asked to come up with a topic, it's usually a quote or a line from the Big Book. And that is a card that I play in my life often. Right. And I'll explain to you what that means. And so I think that on some levels, I've always been seeking God. I heard a quote in a meeting. If I had $1 for every tidbit of wisdom I got in Alcoholics Anonymous, I'd be a multimillionaire. But I heard a quote in the meeting that somebody said, and I'm paraphrasing, God's proximity to me never changes. It's my awareness of it that does. Right. And so what I come to find this far into my journey is that it's been God the entire time. And my entire life, I've been seeking God or seeking a spiritual experience or seeking connection, right? And I've heard one of those very like pop buzz culture quotes that says the opposite of addiction is connection. And I think that it is my connection with God that is the opposite of my addiction. Because it is only in connecting with God that I'm offered an opportunity to connect with you, to connect with my children, with the guys at work and everything else. And so the thing is that like I was raised in the church from a very young age. We were going to church every single Sunday. And so I had this grounding in this idea that like God was this kind of abstract thing in the sky that I could call on when I was in trouble and would frown upon my wrongdoings. And if I did something really, really bad, I'd probably be, excommunicado from the gates of heaven at some point in my life. And that's how I lived my life, this kind of, and I'm just warning you, this thing's not going to be linear, right? If you were hoping for like a really nice linear thing, it's not at all, right? So, right. And so what I've been meditating on lately is the way that Bill has described God in the third step, right? God as the employer, God as the father, God as the principal, right? And so I never saw God in any of those lights, right? What I saw God was kind of like, almost like this well-wishing boogeyman who was going to come down on me if I did something wrong, but really had my best interests in mind. And so it worked to some extent to keep me out of trouble, to have this fear that if I did something really wrong, that I'd be like doomed to eternal damnation. I started messing around long before I ever put a drink in my face I started messing around with the isms of alcoholism. There was a part of me where lies just flew out of my mouth for no real reason at all. Like I just concocted stories, right? If I saw something that I wanted that didn't belong to me, I decided in that moment that it belonged to me with no remorse, right? And this is from like single digit age, this kind of stuff was like, so by the time, right? And then, so by the time I had my first drink at 12 years old, right? I was restless, right? Or Hightower says this, I was restless, irritable, and discontent as long as I could be. Right. And so like by the time I was 12 years old, there was a pressure valve to release. Because why are we drinking in the first place? I'm not drinking because I want to like that. It is well past like we don't drink to enjoy life. We don't drink to socialize. We don't drink. Right. I am drinking for oblivion. I was drinking for oblivion from day one. And so there was already I was drinking away the weight of the guilt, shame, remorse, and the noise in my mind that came from living a life driven by character defects. And I hadn't the slightest idea that that was my reality so young in life. Obviously, I was a kid. Right. And so I find booze and I don't like start drinking alcoholically regularly, but every time that I encountered booze, I overdid it. Right. And there would be like run-ins with consequences, and the consequences, some of them would be really big, and I would not be able to match the consequences with the drinking. Right. What I did was I would tell myself that it was the crew of people I was hanging out with, or it was the type of liquor I was drinking, or whatever excuse I gave myself, because there was no part of my brain that was ready to even consider the option of giving up booze. And so I went through life being relatively successful at everything I tried. I did well in school, right? I got a good job. If I met a pretty girl and I wanted her attention, I usually got it, right? Like I decided one day that I wanted to get in shape. And so I started going to the gym. I learned everything I needed to learn about getting in shape, and I got into great shape. So I thought that because I had these external things that seemed to be okay, that I couldn't possibly be an alcoholic. There was no way that I could, right? And the reason why I was so resistant to the label of alcoholic was, one, because I didn't really know what an alcoholic was. Two, because my dad was a crack addict who got murdered 6 blocks from my home. And so every time that I would step over this like invisible, this line that I created for myself and said like, okay, if it interferes with this, I'll get help. If it interferes with this, I'll get help. Right. The last line had always been, I don't want to be my dad. And so if I ever even looked at accepting the idea that I was an alcoholic, then it meant that I'd become my dad. And if I walked around with any like core resentment and fear, it was the resentment that my dad couldn't get his life together and get a hold of his addiction to stay alive for his kids, which is, when you write that down on paper, you see how crazy you really are, right? And then the fear that I was going to turn into him, even though I was doing everything in my power to move in the other direction. So when my mom first told me, she said, I think you have a drinking problem, I was 26 years old. I had a 1-year-old son. I was working, driving an ambulance for the city of New York. Right. And I rattled off all of these reasons why I wasn't an alcoholic. And then I went to an AA meeting. Right. And the reason that I knew to go to an AA meeting is because on a rock climbing trip 10 years before that, I had been climbing with a guy who was getting sober, and there was a big book on the dashboard. And as we sat for an hour driving home from this climbing trip, I was flipping through the big book and asking him questions. And now Mike, I've told this story before, Mike was like, he's like a character out of Old School. Like he was the like the college jock running naked through the quad, like he was that guy. And so when Mike was getting sober and like he's rushing me off the cliff so that we had to, because he had to make 90 meetings in 90 days, that really, that piqued my interest. And so as I'm flipping through the book and I'm reading this old language and not really understanding anything that's in there, I slam the book shut and I say, Mike, what's this about? He said, it's about God, man. He said, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what God or how you choose to seek God. You just have to find God here. I said, okay. So 10 years later, when my mom said I might have a drinking problem, I went to an AA meeting. And I left the AA meeting because nobody, like I said something absolutely ridiculous at the meeting. And when I left, nobody like applauded me, right? I wanted a trophy just for showing up. I wanted a parade to come through because Matt had walked into an AA meeting in the first place. And I left. And then what I tried to do was cut out the middleman, right? Being raised in the church. When I was 18, I chased this pretty girl into a church, into a born-again Christian church. She left, I stayed, and I'm a joiner, right? Like joiner. Monday night, men's meeting, Tuesday night, prayer study, Thursday night, Bible study. Like I was there 5 days, 6 days out of the week, right? And so I wanted to go back to this place because it was the last place that I'd felt like a tangible relationship to God. And I would leave that place and go drink. I would bring my son with me to church drunk. Right. And so that wasn't working. Right. And so eventually as the consequences start to pile up, as my ability to hide and control and rationalize my drinking continues, I find myself back in Alcoholics Anonymous. And the first time that I went through the steps and I sat with my sponsor and we talked about powerlessness and we talked about unmanageability, and I'm pretty sure he explained it just right. I just wasn't available for the explanation at the time. I wanted to be done. On some part of my brain, I thought that there was a certificate that I was going to receive here that was going to deem me sober, and then I could get on with my life, maybe go to meetings from time to time. And so the first time that we approached step 2, I said to him in the kitchen, I said, I understand that when you say higher power, you mean God. I know God. Let's keep going. And what happens in that place? Well, the first thing that happened was shortly after that, I was really, really drunk. But the other thing that happens in that place is that I rob myself of the opportunity to develop a relationship with God that's experiential, right? I don't get to meet God if I just push God to the back of my mind and I say, I know God. Well, Matt, if you knew God, you wouldn't be sitting at my kitchen table asking me how to help you put your life back together, is what he should have said to me. But he was incredibly patient, and he knew that I would have been resistant to something like that. And so the idea of surrendering to something that I think I already know robs me of that entire opportunity. So what happens is for a year and a half, or a little over a year, I come in and out. But Alcoholics Anonymous does something to you where it gives an opportunity for God to work, like Donna says, in and through you in spite of you. Because although I was going back out and I was drinking and I was coming back, every time I came back, it got a little bit easier to be honest. Every time I came back, it got a little bit easier to talk about the things that I was ashamed of. Every time I came back, it felt a little bit better to go to the diner with you guys afterwards, because I wasn't going home to sit in my own stuff. And so what was happening slowly and what I didn't understand was that I was being cracked open, right? I was slowly but surely being cracked open, and relapse is not a requirement but understand that I relapsed many times over the years from when I first got here. So it is possible to have permanent sobriety after some relapses. I promise you that. And so in over the course of that year, I went to treatment 3 times, right? And on the second trip to treatment, I couldn't, like, my this ego of mine that just kept, like, it was this indestructible ego, right? I'm sitting in one of the groups, and I was so delusional that I thought that because I'd studied substance abuse and counseling in college, that made me more like the counselors than the patients at the rehab, right? And so I would sit next to the counselors, and right, and look upon the patients like, look at these sorry SOBs kind of deal, right? Like, not even seeing that I was one of them or why I was there. And so it was one time I go into it was an outpatient in-house thing that we had at our job, and I find myself sitting across from this woman named Marsha, who was one of the counselors. And God bless her. I don't even know why I'm getting choked up thinking of this. And so I'm trying, like, all of these things are going around in my head, and how am I going to do this? And how is this going to work? And how am I here again? And all of this other stuff. And she says, Matt, because every time you come here, you stay here. And it doesn't go from here to here. It doesn't take the long trip, 18 inches from the head to the heart. And that didn't make any sense to me whatsoever. As smart as I was, as much as I'd read, I couldn't understand what it meant for it to go from here to here. And then I sit quietly for 1 second, and I look at her and I say, but Marsha, I've hurt so many people. I've hurt so many people. And she stands up from her seat. She's all of 5'1", little Cuban woman. And she starts clapping. And she says, that's it. She said, it just touched your heart a little bit. And I started to realize that I wasn't drinking for anything other than to treat my internal condition. And so that moment was like this turning moment in my sobriety. It didn't keep me from relapsing, but the seed had been planted. And so after the longest run I'd had since I first came to Alcoholics Anonymous, right, I find myself in my bed after 4 days of drinking and drinking accessories. And when I hear my 6-year-old getting himself ready for school in the next room, this voice comes to my head, right? I always call it this thought, and it's 100% not a thought. This voice comes to my head that sounds like mine, much quieter than I am, because I'm really hard on myself. My internal dialogue can be really rough. And it says, if you don't get up and do something, you're going to leave that boy with the same fate you had when you were his age. And he was 6, and I was 6 when my dad was killed. And I'd never made the connection until that moment when God gave me that inspirational thought. And I'll tell you that I was in the bed, so dehydrated, so malnourished. I was checking my pulse with an app on the phone, because I knew that if it went above a certain number, I should probably go to the hospital because I was going to have a stroke. And I had no energy, no will, no nothing to get out of bed. And after that thought came into my head, I sprung out of bed as if somebody had given me like an IV of espresso. And I called my mom, and I called my job, and I called his mom, and I said, I got to go. Right. And I go to treatment, inpatient this time. Right. And all of these things these God shots start coming, like massive onslaughts. Right. I'm in there for like a week, and my ego still is fighting me. Right. I'm walking around like celebrating that nobody in the rehab can beat me in chess and all of this other stuff. Right. And telling people how they should run their programs because I've been in AA long enough and I can quote the big book and all of this stuff. And then then that same quiet voice, hey man, like, you're here with them because you can't stop drinking just like them. Right. Because my ego wants me separate from you. This disease that we talk about it in the third person, which is my own maladapted thinking process, right? Like, wants me separate from you. It doesn't matter which direction I go separate. It wants me better than you. It wants me worse than you. It just doesn't want me to be like you. Right. And so I start to listen, and I learn the truth about alcoholism, this idea of powerlessness, right? That when I start drinking, I can't stop because it activates this allergy. right? And what it looks like in real time is that everything that I've ever wanted is promised to me in the drink to come, right? My friend Miles says the answer to all my problems right there, right? And so I keep doing that. And then I had to learn about this obsession, this mind that tries to convince me in the presence of evidence to the contrary that drinking is a good idea, right? Because the insanity of alcoholism has nothing to do with me like hanging shirtless from the rafters at the bar. It has nothing to do with me like spending all my money. It has nothing to do with the chaos that I cause at home. The insanity of alcoholism is having caused all of that chaos, making the stone cold sober decision to put a drink in my face, right? That's the insanity of alcoholism. And then we had to get to the unmanageability of my spirit. And I didn't understand that it was the unmanageability of my spirit because I rattled off all of these external accomplishments I had and things that were still in order, thinking that my life was somehow manageable. And my sponsor says in his quiet, gentle voice, he says, yeah, Matt, but what about your insides? He says, if I give you those things or take those things away, what is your internal condition like? And he opens the big book to page 52 and he rattles off the bedevilments and he's like, check, 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 check. I'm not going to read them off because if you don't know what the bedevilments are, I just told you what page they're on. Trying to get you inside the big book. Right? And what I learned is that that's what I'd been treating the entire time. The bedevilments are not the spiritual malady. The bedevilments are what the spiritual malady looks like in action. Right? I have this default setting, right? And so I have this default setting where I am chronically dissatisfied with myself, with you, with how you run your life, with traffic, with the temperature of my coffee, with everything under the sun. I am just, when I'm here, I want to be there, right? And this is because what I try to do is run my own life on my own will, and it doesn't work. And my best decision ever was to walk into a meeting and say, hey, I need help. Right. And so, and I love telling this story. I wish Chris was here. And I sit in a meeting of 79 She Workshop, 10 p.m., trying to process all of the information I just got. And what happens is, Chris, and I love to paint this picture. If anybody's from New York or the New York area, if you've ever been to a meeting where somebody from the Atlanta group is speaking, right, they do it up. They look like they're going to a banquet. They do the shirt and tie. And that's not a shot at the Atlanta group. Every Atlanta group speaker I've heard has been absolutely phenomenal, right? Like, and my friend Chris is sitting in the front row and he's bald and he's jacked and he's got a Phoenix tattoo coming up the side of his face. And he was not my friend at the time. And I'm thinking in my head, like, what is this guy going to say? Because he keeps doing this. Like, he's thinking about sharing, he's not. And then at the end of the meeting, he says, he's the very last person to share. And he says, when I was out there trying to kill myself, God brought me here. He says, so now that I'm here, why would I question for a second if God's going to see me through? And that was, I don't know why I'm so emotional today. That was the moment. That was my coming to believe moment. And it wasn't even the second part, right? It wasn't even the, like, why would I question if God's going to see me through? He said, it's when I was out there trying to kill myself, God brought me here. I didn't make a decision to stop drinking. I didn't make a decision to do any of that, right? I love when people introduce themselves and they say, I was separated from alcohol. What separates me from alcohol? God. I don't do that. I don't have the power. The whole reason I'm here is because I am powerless. I don't have the power to do that, right? I have an atheist, a staunch atheist friend of mine. I met up with him a couple of years ago. And he says, he's from St. Thomas, you still going to those meetings, man? I said, yeah. He said, you don't got to do that. You decided one day you're not going to drink anymore. You don't drink anymore. I said, I decided I wasn't going to drink 1,000,000 times, and I found myself drunk 1,000,001. Right? And so I love the title of this meeting because I use the title when I talk about how I approach step 2. And how I approach step 2 is addition by subtraction. The only way that I'm going to create room for God is to start by removing myself as a possible solution to the problem. Because if the truth of my step one experience doesn't convince me that I'm going to mess it up, that I am truly powerless, that I'm going to suffer from this obsession if I can't grab hold of God, that my life is going to continuously and continually be unmanageable, drunk or sober, without a relationship with God, then I'm not going to arrive at this conclusion that God's going to fix it, that God brought me here so that he could see me through. Right? I'm not going to be driven to the place of total surrender. And in the beginning, I don't know what total surrender feels like. Right? I tell my guys in the beginning, total surrender means start writing. There's some things I have to learn about myself. The unmanageability of my spirit has to spill onto the paper so that I can see it in black and white, so I can understand not only that I am resentful, but why I'm resentful, what I do to hold on to these resentments, how they affect me, all the areas of my life that are driven by this anger, by these unmet expectations, these unrealistic expectations I set on myself and others, these roles that I assign myself and others, all of these things that make me so damn angry. And I'm scared, right? I'm scared because I want to control outcomes, and I've never been able to. Every time I thought I just had everything right, like perfectly in the juggle, one of the balls falls and the whole thing collapses. And so I live in fear that every time I try to take all these, like I am not enough. Right? And the beauty, because when I dissect fear, when I start going down a fear spiral, or I start like, okay, well, if this is the fear, what does that mean? And if that is the fear, then what does that mean? And that, right? Like what I arrive at is I'm not good enough, and I'm not good enough because self-reliance has failed me every time. And I tell my guys all of the time that I'm not good enough is perfect. Thank God I'm not good enough. Because if any part of me thought that I was good enough, I would not seek God with the enthusiasm that I seek God. I become good enough when I get this relationship with God. I gain access to power. God comes in and plugs the plug in, and all of a sudden I'm this lit lamp. And all of a sudden things just start to make sense. Having the difficult conversation with my sponsor about like my fears and my resentments and all of the people that I've hurt and the harm that I've done, like it's terrifying to me. And then I sit down and I do it, and the world doesn't come crashing down, and I'm a little bit more free. And I say, God, like, I don't want to live like this anymore. I don't. These things are getting in the way of me happy, joyous, and free. They're getting in the way of the man that you created and the man that you want me to be. It's keeping me from being the father to my kids that I want, the son to my mom, right? I can't do this anymore. God, take it. And he says, okay, but I'm going to need you to go out and make some repairs. Every single promise that I'm given in this program is contingent upon some action on my part. He's going to take him. He's going to take him. He's going to take him when he wants. That's why I say good and bad. I don't know which one is which. I don't know when they're going to go. I just move in the direction of God, and God does the rest. And the power of God happens so much when I go to make amends, right? I love the way Alice describes it. She says, we spend a lot of time tearing through the fabric of the universe, right? And we got to spend some time stitching it back together, right? So I go out and I do that on this errand of like, I don't want to live my life looking over my shoulder anymore. I don't want to walk into a room and be uncomfortable because of something I did to somebody. Here, man, here's your money. Because I have one job, right? God doesn't give me a burning bush, right? I don't get like, I'm not going to come down from the mountain with tablets. I don't get any of this stuff. When I ask for direction from God, 99.99999% of the time, the answer is in some way or some form to help you guys inside and outside of this place. And the only way I'm going to be able to do that is if I'm prepared as I go through life to correct my wrongs to the best of my ability. So that I can then, with this slate wiped clean, I can live my life in a place where I can be of use, where I can have purpose, right? Where I can be helpful to people. where I have a message to carry. And the further I move through the steps, right? I came in with this like willingness, and it blossoms into faith. It blossoms into belief, excuse me. Right. And I start to believe because I see things are really happening here. And the belief turns into faith, because faith, right? Faith doesn't require that I see it to believe it, but I have enough evidence now that God is working in my life, and I understand that he separated me from booze and he brought me to you, right? And all of these things about me that I thought were really me are not me, right? They're these things I picked up, and these things I picked up from people who were doing the best that they could with what they learned, and maybe some of it's like genetic, and who knows and who cares? It doesn't matter. I'm here now. Here's the path. And then that belief turns into faith. And by the time I've gone out and made amends, I can't help but leave that amends process with trust. And I start to trust and rely upon God. Because if you did half of the stuff that I did, those amends were really scary, right? And so this idea that God is everything or else he is nothing that they talk about in We Agnostics, I have to come to the place where it's that dichotomous, it's that binary, right? As I go through life, I am going to return back to this place of being untreated from time to time, right? I don't do this perfectly. If my ability to communicate the steps and my experience behind them at all gave you the impression that I work a perfect Alcoholics Anonymous program, you have been misled. Right? And what happens is the bedevilments start to become the promises that I get to receive when my alcoholism goes untreated. Right? And so the first time when I take people through, there's a few people here who have been taken through in the workshop with us, right? Like when we take people through, we do an exercise on the bedevilment, right? Have I come to the realization that this is the manifestation of me doing my best, right? On my best day with my own power, on my own power, right? And so if that's the best that I can do on my own power, where do I stand in life if God is nothing? It's like I make them go through every single bedevilment and write this out, right? But the thing is that like you don't even need to write it down and realize, holy, I'm screwed. I'm done for. If that's the best that I can do on my own power, I'm done for. And so then I have them go back through again and say, where do you stand on this if God is everything? And if you flip and you go to what I like to call the fluffy promises of the big book, when you go to the 9-step promises and you read them, they pretty much read like the opposite of the bedevilments. And what I have been granted is freedom from that spiritual malady as long as I continue to seek God. And my seeking is not just my step 11 practice. My seeking is my 10-step practice. How can I relate to you on a level that I see you as one of God's children? Because if I see you like one of God's children, then if I harm you, I want to correct that. I want to amend that. If I see you as one of God's children and you inspire for some reason or another resentment or fear or anger or whatever it is, I ask God to take that away because I don't want to feel like that anymore. And I don't want to feel like that to one of God's kids. I also don't want to inspire that in anybody else. And then I'm free, right? Cease fighting everything or anyone. And then I get the coolest promises in the big book, at least in my opinion, which are like this really long paragraph of different descriptions of God's grace. I'm not going to read those either. Page 84 and 85, go get them. And when I arrive at step 11, I get to like, what I do is I sit with that whole experience that I've had and how I'm going through my life. And I just talk to my papa. That's what my sponsor said. He says, I talk to my pop. Right. And this practice of seeking God has morphed in the last 7.5 years. It's gone from like getting on my knees on my bedside and reading the prayers that you guys told me to. It's gone from times when I'm like completely frustrated with life and I smack my forehead on the ground. And I say, God, what the hell is going on? Right. And now I wake up in the morning and I have a ritual. And that ritual is probably going to change at some point or another. But I'll tell you something. There have been a bunch of really cool God is everything moments over the last year. Because I think that if I get up here and have a talk with you and I don't talk about what my life and relationship with God looks like in the present day, I'm doing you a disservice. Right? Now, my girlfriend, the reason I'm here in Costa Rica is because my girlfriend's graduating from an immersive yoga teacher training program. Not that I needed any excuse to come to Costa Rica, but having her graduation be one of them worked really well. Right? Now, she has been on her own quest to see God. She's been on her own path to see God. And like any relationship under the sun, it has not always been sunshine and rainbows. Now, we came to a place a few months ago where we were wondering if this was even worth it. Right? 5.5 years, like we're and in a peaceful place. And I said, well, I'm not going to make that decision based on what we're experiencing right now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take it to God. And I said, God, I need some direction here. So I don't know what to do. And I take that into meditation for like a week. And I'm coming into Saturday morning and I'm sitting on my couch. And she calls me frantically. She says, I sent you a link. Can you please get me 2 tickets? Because my phone's not working. And I look on it, and it was we've developed this practice of listening to our favorite pastor's sermon every Monday morning. I usually work Sundays, so Monday mornings, if I'm home, we sit and we have breakfast and we watch the replay of the sermon on YouTube. And they were coming to New York. The pastor, the church was coming to New York, and she wanted 2 tickets to go to this pop-up. And then she says, there's an option for me to get baptized. I would like to get baptized. Now, she's 30 years old, right? I was baptized because I was forced to be baptized. And this is not at all, right? This is my story. There's nothing about Christianity or baptism or anything. I'm telling you how God shows up in my life. And we go down and meet her and my 3-year-old daughter. And I get to watch her have this water rebirth in the church. And it becomes this incredibly powerful experience. And she gets out of the water and she walks up to me and she says, I don't know what life would be like without you. And there's no chance I want to not do this. And now my step 11 practice since that day has been me and her sitting every morning that I'm home. We do our spiritual readings together. We do our prayer and meditation together. And we bring God into every single conversation that we have. Now, I've been sober the entire time. She's never met Matt, the true maniac. Right? Like, she's seen me in varying degrees of sobriety. Right? Like, you want to know how sober I am, see me at 7:30 in the morning when I'm trying to get a 3-year-old and a 14-year-old ready for school. Right? But like, she's seen me in varying degrees of sobriety. She's never seen me fully drunk. She's watched me seek God and talk about God, right? And all of this stuff, all of these years. And she's never once been inspired to. But what I find is God works best when we recognize our own brokenness. When we recognize that the crisis that we're experiencing, whatever that crisis is 100% self-imposed. There is power that gets unlocked in the ownership of that, right? I have been taking everything into prayer and meditation. I've stopped making big decisions. It has been, right? And the meditation that I talked about in the beginning has been meditating on the idea as God the Father. right? Because I spent so much of my life identifying as the fatherless kid. And so part of the growth in this meditation has been like, how can I identify that I haven't been fatherless the entire time, that I've had God? And I only seem to get closer to him as I get older. And so I love my job. It is part of my identity. But I do really feel that God is calling me to do something else, to move in another direction. And in a couple of years, I'm going to have the opportunity to do that. Now, Sunday morning, I usually go to an 11-step meeting in Manhattan, 79th Street. I wasn't going to go this Sunday because I had a ton of stuff to do for the day, so I was going to go to a closer meeting. I went to Starbucks. That made me late for the meeting that I was going to go to, so I didn't go to that one. So I found my way downtown, and I go up into the church because between 9 and 10, there's nobody there, and it's a beautiful, quiet, reverent place to sit for prayer meditation. And I sat for, I want to say 10 minutes minimum of continuous prayer, which is long for me. 10 minutes of continuous prayer. The end of which I said, God, I can feel like you're moving me in this direction. I'm just not entirely sure if this is the way that I should go. And then I sat and I did a guided meditation with this woman named Sarah Blondin, who's one of my favorite guided meditation teachers, right? I go to the meeting and things start to get spooky. I walk into the meeting that I wasn't going to go to. And one of my favorite people in all of Alcoholics Anonymous was the speaker that day. And she was there with her husband, who, if she's one of my favorite people, he's a really close second. And she's one of the most spiritual people I know. If you've ever heard me say, in the absence of God, I'm going to treat my alcoholism with alcohol or character defects, know that I stole that from Linda E. Right? So I give her all the credit. She's phenomenal. Now, first part is she says, she's speaking, and it's on step 11, obviously, it's talking about this seeking God thing. And she says, so I recently left my job with the city of New York. She said, and everybody I spoke to about it said, there's no way you can leave this job. She said, I don't know, God's calling me in another direction. She said, somebody else said to her, pension over purpose. Pension over purpose. And the thing is that really resonated with me, not because it sounded like something I had just prayed about, but because I'll tell you what happened is I came to Alcoholics Anonymous because I wanted to stop feeling like poop. I wanted to stop hurting people. I wanted to stop drinking when I didn't really want to drink. What happened is that I went through this series of steps that unlock this experience that I get to have a relationship with God. And if I rely on God, then I get to be privy to miracles every single day of my life. And a byproduct of being a cool member of this miracle society is that I don't want to drink. I don't even think about it. It's not even a thing. Right. And so I'm sitting in this meeting, it says pension over purpose. And the thing is that what I thought when I came here was that I was going to get like money and this and that, like I was going to be able to like build up my life on this material level. And what I get is purpose. What I get is useful. What I get is to be a part of. What I get is community. What I get is an opportunity to be the father that my kids need. What I get is an opportunity to fly out and support her when she's terrified out here by herself. I get to be one of the guys at work. And I also get to have options in life where if God is moving in me in a direction where I might be of better service, where I might be of better use, where I might be of better purpose, I get to listen to that and follow that because I have come to a place of trust. I get to live a way better life than I deserve today. Right? And my sponsor doesn't like when I say that. He says, you deserve everything, baby. Right? And not from a place of entitlement, but more of like, I am the product of grace. I am the product of grace. And no matter what I do no matter where I go. There's nothing that I can do that's going to make God love me anymore. It doesn't matter how many speaking engagements I do or people I sponsor or coffee commitments I take, or it doesn't matter. There's also nothing that I can do that's going to make God love me any less. Right? Thank you guys for letting me share.
Hey everybody, my name is Andy. Blessed to be an alcoholic, and well, thank you, Matt, for your riveting share, the language of the heart with such honesty, insightfulness, passion, and gratitude. God has clearly appropriated your voice, my brother. So we're fortunate to have Matt here for about 15 minutes to answer your burning or perhaps smoldering questions focused on his talk today. Beatrice is up first. Come on in, Beatrice. Or Bridget, I'm sorry, Bridget.
It's so crazy. Everybody calls me Beatrice. I'm just going to be the AA Beatrice. Bridget Alcoholic. Thank you so much, Matt. I'm going to be straight to the point to respect everybody's time. I'm so grateful for you. You're so profound. Thank you for what you said. My ego wants me to be better than you or worse than you and not like you. I had to write that down. I stole it. And when you said, why am I so emotional today? I automatically looked at the screen and said, it is gratitude. And then God said to me, clear as day, it's tears of joy from him because I'm so proud of you. You know, he's proud of you. So he wanted me to say that. And my question is, lately I've been rushing myself in my head a lot, like rushing myself, and it's hard for me to deal with that. So my question is like, how did you deal with that? If you dealt with that, it's like I'm rushing myself, do this, do that. I'm still having that issue. I pray, meditate, but it still bothers me. So can you help me with that? And thank you so much.
Thank you. So, how do I deal with rushing? So the first thing that I do is I make sure that my morning ritual is non-negotiable, right? And sometimes that's really hard because if I'm at the firehouse, like we get calls and whatever it is. So as soon as I'm back, I find a quiet corner to do what I need to do. I find that I'm more prone to allow the committee in my head to run rampant and unchecked if I'm not in my morning ritual. And I'm also really busy, right? Like I work, I have these kids, I teach yoga, I train, I do all of this stuff. And that's not a complaint at all. Like I prayed for a big life and I got one. And when this guy, Chris, that sponsored me for a little while, he said, when you feel really overwhelmed, he said, make a list of 5 things that you're going to do for the day and limit it to just 5. And then that's it. And when you're done with that, be done and be okay with that. Right. And that's some practical advice. There's nothing about a list of 5 in the big book. Right. That's just you're asking me what my experience was. And that was the experience I had when I was kind of constantly feeling overwhelmed and rushing through life and feeling like I had all these things I had to do and all of these things were on my mind. The list of 5 was incredibly helpful for me. So I hope I helped. Thank you.
Thank you, Bridget, for that question. Thank you, Matt, for that answer. Don't see any other hands up right now. So, Matt, I'm going to throw this out to you. Do you think being too hard on yourself, beating yourself up, can be a block to your connection with God?
100%. So that in and of itself can be a character defect, right? Like that negative self-talk, holding myself to this impossible standard, right? And that sentiment that I ended with, this idea that like nothing I can do can make God love me more or any less, is like God's not beating me up. God's never been beating me up. Like I am the one, right? I am the aggressor in this situation. And so like it doesn't serve any real purpose whatsoever, right? And that is not something that I was able to grasp when I first got here. That definitely takes practice. But it's more of like, if there's something that I don't like about myself, or some way that I don't like that I'm showing up, or some way that, that I'm not comfortable with or happy about, I am afforded an opportunity to pick up the tools that we have here, and they work for 100% of the situations. Right. And so either I'm going to sit in this like this hot tub of self-pity and just like lap it all over myself and beat myself up for how terrible I am. Or I'm going to get off my sorry ass and do something about it. Right. And that might be calling somebody, that might be praying meditation, that might be writing some inventory. Usually it's some combination of all of those things. Right.
Thank you, Matt, for that answer. Very helpful. Hey, Monica, you're up next. Come on in.
Hey, good evening or good afternoon, everyone. My name is Monica. I'm an alcoholic. Matt, thank you. What a powerful and peaceful share, right? Just wanted to ask you about like how did you start your prayer meditation routine, and what does it look like today? Because I heard you say that you take everything in prayer. You take everything in prayer meditation, and just wanted to get some ideas. Thanks.
Thank you, Monica. So it took me 6 months before I even made any attempt at meditation when I got here. Prayer, I was doing what you guys told me, right? Like when I first got here, you have the salty long timers who were like, put your shoes under your bed so that you get down on your knees and you pray while you're there. And I did exactly that. And I would say like the 3rd step prayer, or the serenity prayer, or the 7th step prayer, or the Our Father, or whatever it was, or wherever I was at in my sobriety. And then over time that felt mechanical. Right. And so I started just praying from my heart. Right. And I also believe, and this is just my personal belief, I know that the act of getting on your knees is this grand act of humility. Right. But I also believe that the all-powerful creator of the universe, he doesn't care where I'm sitting when I pick up the phone. He just wants me to pick up the phone. Right. And so my meditation practice, and I'm going to tell a story. I like to tell stories. So I went to the Mustard Seed on 37th Street in New York City, which has been there, I don't know, since Bill was around, probably. And it was my first, I walked into it as a meditation meeting by accident. I didn't know. I was just looking for a local meeting, and it said meeting, and I went there. And the young woman who was chairing the meeting, she said, if you've never meditated before, I want you to sit there and count your breaths up to 10. And every time you get interrupted, start back at 1. She said, if you make it to 10, count your breaths back down from 10 to 1. And if you get interrupted, start back at 1. Right? Now, and over the course of that meeting, I did not make it to 10. Over the course of that first month, I did not make it to 10. Right? But I kept trying at it until eventually I got to 10. And then at 3 years sober, I became a yoga teacher by accident. And I started to really get into the practice of like Eastern meditation and using Tibetan singing bowls and chanting mantras and right. And that's not the big book. That's not the meditation they're talking about in the big book. Right. And so what my meditation looks like now is exactly what they say to look like to do in the big book. So my girlfriend and I get up in the morning and we sit and we have a few books that we read spiritual blurbs from. Right. And sometimes those blurbs take us to the big book and we go there. And then we will sit quietly in meditation. And what I'm supposed to do is I'm supposed to ask God to direct me for the day. Right. And like this kind of thing where the prayer and meditation happen at the same time. But what I'm supposed to be doing in meditation is reflecting. Right. It's this period of reflection. Right. Like I ask for God to direct my day, divorce my thinking of all of these things. Right. So and then I have to sit there and let that absorb and listen for some direction. If I'm looking for direction, I need to listen for direction, right? I don't pull up on the corner of the street and say, hey, man, do you know how to get to the Domino's, and then just pull off, right? Like I got to listen for what the guy says if I'm going to make it to the Domino's. And at night, right? My nightly review is a meditation on my day. How did I do today? Right? What fell through the cracks of my step 10 practice throughout the day? Right. And then I say, God, can you please forgive me because I try to do your job again today and I still suck at it. And then I give God 15 minutes of my time before I go to bed. That's what it looks like today. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica, for the question. Thank you, Matt, for what you had to say, your answer, and also mentioning the mustard seed. My recollection of that place is you got to duck your head no matter how tall you are. When you go down there, you're going to bang your head on that ceiling. So thank you for that. All right, Eric, come on in.
Hey, Eric, alcoholic. Thanks, Matt, for your lead. I have a question. You said you're a fireman. I work as a nurse in an emergency psychiatric ward, and I was wondering how, like, if that stuff that you see at work, if it challenges you to remain faithful, and how you deal with that. Thanks.
Thank you, Eric. So I think from doing the work that I do for so long, it doesn't become as challenging emotionally unless children are involved. Then it gets rough. But what I have learned over time is that where I am in my job, and this has been my experience, is that I don't know if my purpose there is primarily to help the people of the city of New York, right, in that role, or if my job is, if God put me there so that I can be an example that sober firefighters exist and live long, happy lives, and then I can be connected to other sober firefighters. Because I'll tell you that I think me in that role, I've been more helpful as an instrument to God than putting out people's fires. So, thank you.
Thank you, Eric, for that question. And Matt, for your answer, it looks like we have one more question to go, and that's going to be from Bill. Bill, come on in.
Yes, I would love to come in. I'm an alcoholic named Bill. And my question is, because there's a lot of this stuff going on, when did you reach the nirvana or the awakened state to know that, like, you could be a circuit speaker for AA and then answer questions with almost an authoritative directive to where maybe people are going to rely on the answers you're given? Whatever happened in AA to the experience, strength, and hope? And I don't say that divisively. I mean, I think it's a good platform, unless, of course, you don't have the answer, but you give one because they put you in the position that you're supposed to. When you talked about the miraculous things that you get to see every day, I think maybe what you're alluding to, if I followed you correctly, was the awakeness allows you to see what's been there the whole time. But isn't that interesting that almost sometimes we get put in a position of trust where the answer I give you, and I like what you said, it was your opinion on a couple things, because does anyone in AA really have an answer that's speaking on behalf of the whole fellowship?
Thanks, Bill. I think they cut you off because of the time.
Yep, go ahead, Matt. You get a gist of Bill's question?
I think so. I don't know how much question was in there, but I don't know that I was put in a position of anything. I think I was asked to share my experience on different things. I'm not the authority on anything. I don't speak on behalf of AA, and I'm not a circuit speaker. Right? Like I'm just a drunk who's had an experience, and so somebody asked me to share that experience, and so that's what I did. Somebody asked me what my step 11 practice looks like. I'm just telling you what my step 11 practice looks like. You don't have to do that. That's up to you. You have everybody's experience and relationship with God is individual to them. That's what the beauty of this whole thing is. But I'll tell you something, that when I've heard people in meetings talk about, I try this to get closer to God, I try that to get closer to God, I've taken tidbits from everybody that I've heard. And what I've come up with is this cornucopia of tools that have allowed me from different angles to just get closer to God and allow God into the dark places of my life. So if this format somehow brushed up against your understanding of the traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous, I'm sorry, I just try to be of service.
Well, thank you, Eric, for the question, and Matt, for your answer. Appreciate that. We've got one more, Matt, and this is going to be it. Michael, come on in.
Hello, I'm Mike B. Sporadic 89997. Man, it was I was listening to you speak, and it was just so eloquent, man, and God eloquent to me to hear it broke down in your process. And I was just wondering one thing. I heard you say when I get into step 3 in the morning after I pray as much as I can, I realize that 90% of the day is none of my business. And I was wondering if you wanted to circle back, because you said on accident. I heard you say that a few times. And I was wondering, wouldn't that really be God placing you and doing things and not an accident? I was just a little confused by it. That's all.
No, thank you, Mom. So it's 100%. It's just me being playful. It's absolutely God, right? Like nothing, absolutely nothing is an accident, right? And just to piggyback a little bit off of something that Bill said just before you, right? It's like I get to be aware of the miracles that come in my life, right? One of the lines that I opened up with is this idea that like God's proximity to me has never changed. It's my awareness of it that changes. And so when I reach, right, I don't know that I've ever reached the state of nirvana, but when I reach a place where I'm seeking enough, right, when I'm constantly seeking God, what I start to see is God in all things. Right. And so when these things happen by accident, right, like when I say, I became a yoga teacher by accident, I became a firefighter by accident, right? Like none of those things were accidents at all. Right. The New York City Fire Department saved my life. The New York City Fire Department brought me to Alcoholics Anonymous. Right. My yoga teacher, that has become one of the coolest, greatest experiences. And people don't come to my yoga classes because I have the coolest flows. I don't. I'm also probably the least flexible person in the room. I lift too much weight. But you know what I do? I talk about God all the time. I talk program to them in code. And so what these muggles don't know is that they're getting a dose of what Alcoholics Anonymous has been teaching me the entire time. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Mike, for the question and Matt for the answer. Okay, we've come to the end of the Q&A. Again, thank you, Matt, and everybody that's participated today.